There are millions of podcasts being done all over the world that take on the personalities of their creator. Some bring in thousands of listeners each week. Some bring in large amounts of revenue, while others entertain millions and help sell products. If you're like many podcasters, you want to reach your maximum potential. But how? How do you make your podcast stand out from all the rest? Join Dr. Barrett Matthews as he talks to experts who are doing it on The Productive Podcaster. Hello again. Welcome to another edition of The Productive Podcaster. I am Dr. Barrett Matthews. And once again, The Productive Podcaster is a show on podcasting for podcasters. It's to show you how you can be more productive, whether that be bringing in more revenue, whether that be bringing in more listeners, whether that be getting more content out, how you define being productive. We want to make sure you can get there, and we have a variety of ways to make that happen. So that's what we do here on The Productive Podcaster. And just like every episode we have done previously, we want to start out with pros and cons.
Pros and cons.
Now, pros and cons is a feature we do on The Productive Podcaster to help you learn some of the things, some of the tools you need, some of the ideas you need to make sure your podcast can come off and run smoothly. Now, one of the things we want to talk about today is eliminating noise. Eliminating noise. So, in doing so, what you want to do is, first of all, find a good place to record your podcast. And I know that may sound simple, but it's not always easy. Some people actually do their podcast in a closet. That's right, you heard me, in a closet. Why? Because they can have the quiet they need. They can have the acoustics they need. They can set up things and not have to get outside noise. They do that in a closet. Now, some of you may not have the closet space, but either way, you need to set it up in a place where you can do your podcast in relative quiet. You want to have that peace, because if not, you will run across a lot of background noise in your podcast, and you'll hear it. It'll come across. You'll hear a lot of it when you're doing your podcast. See, I have my trusty mic here. I put it to the side here because I didn't want to have too much noise. So now I got to speak a little softer because I've just brought it closer to me. But I want to make sure you understand you have to have some noise reduction. Now, some people go and get the stuff to put on the side. Now, some of them, I've seen people use egg crates to filter out the noise. Some of them use the foam. But either way, if it helps you to reduce the noise, some of you have noisy places, noisy offices, noisy houses where you do your podcast. And that's okay, but you want to eliminate it. You want to eliminate the humming sounds. You want to eliminate that static sound. You want to make sure that your outside noise is not coming in. Sometimes it could be your air conditioner, your heater coming in, and when it turns on, there's that noise. You want to get to a level to where your sound quality is clean, where your sound quality is pure. You want to get to the point where people say, I like listening to your podcast because the sound comes across clearly. Don't get me wrong. People will tell you these things. They'll tell you the pro and they'll tell you the con. If your sound is not right, they will let you know. So it's in your best interest to make sure that you get those things in order right away so you don't run across these problems later on during your podcast. Does that make sense? I hope it does, because I want to make sure that you all are doing your podcast in a professional sense and with a professional mindset going into it, meaning that you have all your T's crossed, all your I's dotted. You can have your podcast set up to where your audio is straight from the get-go. You can have your podcast set up to where your lighting is good. You can have your podcast set up to where your camera is on point. You can have your podcast set up to where your engineer knows where you're going if you have an engineer. Your producer knows what you want to do if you have a producer. The bottom line is you want to set up your podcast so everything runs smoothly, and outside noise can be a killer. There are audio plugins, editing plugins that can help you reduce noise. Look them up. You'll find them. There are things out there to help you reduce noise. There are microphones that help reduce noise. There are softwares that help you reduce noise. But it won't happen unless you make the first step in saying, I want to reduce that noise. So that concludes pros and cons for today. Now, we're going to be right back with an interview with one of my really good friends right after this break.
You've heard the rumblings. You've even thought of starting your own. But how? Everybody knows podcasting is the fastest and best way to get your message out and grow your business all at once. Although everybody knows this, nobody showed you what to do. Well, Podcast Nation is ready to do all the heavy lifting for you while you just deliver your message and grow. Join the nation and start your podcast today. Text podcast to 929-244-4323 and make them hear your voice.
Do you hear what I hear? That's the sound of your tribe, your audience, your people. That's the sound of your nation. The people who love to hear the sound of your voice as you bring your special message to them in your very own podcast. How do you get it to them? Let us handle that. We're Podcast Nation, and we make sure they hear your voice. Podcast Nation is a full-service podcasting firm that does all the hard work for you so you can be the talent and get your message to your people. Just text podcast to 929-244-4323 and talk to one of our staff on how you can get started with your very own done-for-you podcast. Or just go to podcastnation.com and get started today. That's PODCAST nation.com. Your people are waiting on you. Make them hear your voice. Podcast Nation.
All right, guys, welcome back to the Productive Podcaster. Man, I am excited right now because my guest today is a friend of mine I met just last year, but I tell you, it was one of those things where he's one of those people, I don't think he meets anyone that doesn't like him because he's just one of those people. He has one of those personalities that's just fun and engaging, and he is one of the most creative people that I know of. Matter of fact, you don't have to take it from me. There are other big companies like Disney who might think the same thing about him. So I'm bringing to the Productive Podcaster my friend, Mr. Terry Weaver. Terry, how you doing, man?
Man, I'm doing good. That's interesting that I think there's a lot of people that probably meet me and don't like me and just don't say it. But and actually, man, when we talk about like podcasting and you may not know this about me is I have 3 podcasts.
I knew you had more than one. I didn't know it was 3.
Yeah, I have my podcast that's my own that I do that's called the Making Elephants Fly podcast, where I interview entrepreneurs.
Right here.
I interview entrepreneurs and leaders and all kinds of interesting people. It's mostly an interview format. Every now and then, I'll do what I post an episode that I call Conversations I'm Having with Myself.
Okay.
When I kind of just do like an internal dialogue of like, hey man, here's what's going on between these years. I haven't done one of those in a while. And that's one of the fun things about podcasting is you get to make your own rules.
Uh-huh.
It's people always come to me and say, hey man, I need some help start a podcast. What should I do? It's like, what do you want to do?
Right.
There are no rules. My second podcast is probably the biggest, the largest audience. It's a podcast called WDW Today that is a Walt Disney World podcast. And we spun off a show from that one called Top of the World, which Disney has a timeshare program that I host that podcast as well.
Wow.
And so my show is mostly weekly. WW is weekly. Top of the World was bi-weekly. We took a long hiatus. We came back, and now we're weekly again. So as consistently when we've been able to be through the climate that we're in, with a lot of the world closed down, we kind of have tried to just keep, talking, even though when there wasn't really a thing to talk about. And so
right.
For a while, there was no news. And so, but that's, that's part of the perseverance of entrepreneurship, man, is
that's true.
You just keep going. And even when you don't know what to do, you still go.
And I think that's cool, though, that you're doing 3 podcasts. I tell people, because I always find it funny and I know you've heard this from people, I just don't have the time. I'm like, you have time to do what you love. And let's face it, if you get to all you're doing on a podcast, like you're talking about something you love to talk about. So
yeah, even when you asked me to do this, you asked me if I had the time, and I said no, but I'll make the time.
Right,
and
there you go.
And we make the time for the things that matter to us. And every yes we say in life and in business is a no we have to say to something else.
That's true.
And I'm learning to be a better leader. I'm learning to I've been a bootstrap solopreneur for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm beginning to kind of change my tune a little bit on that and think a little bigger. I've been limited to that with that mentality. And so, in the process of building a team and using, people with global talents and, trying to just grow in a new kind of way and stretch myself and really focus on what I'm good at. And what I'm good at is bringing people together. What I'm good at is helping people move from, kind of get some clarity around what to do next. There's that phrase that's become popular. It's like, what's the next best step? And I spend a lot of my time with folks really just trying to navigate, especially in 2020, man. I've spent a ton of time like, okay, here's the reality of where we are. And I always, I was kind of a mall rat growing up. Like, you just hung out at the mall.
Yeah.
But if you ever go to the mall, which we haven't done a lot of lately.
Right.
And although now that I'm in my 40s and have discovered online shopping and can just order something from my phone case broke yesterday. And I just I bought one at Target and it was like the wrong size or something was wrong with it. It's like, daggone it. And I looked at it, I got on Amazon. It was $10 cheaper. And Amazon has a deal in my neighborhood where they're delivering before 8 a.m. So I ordered it last night, like after my wife had already gone to bed, and it was here well before I got up this morning. And so, and the world's moving fast. The world is changing. And that's one of the beauties of podcasting is how it enables us to change to a rapidly changing world. And helping people, other people kind of figure that out. And entrepreneurship really gives us the ability to be able to move quickly. That a lot of these businesses that you're seeing that have closed down and are struggling, it's because they haven't been able to move fast enough.
That's a great point. That's a very good point. Now, as far as with you, how has podcasting affected your business?
Oh, in all kinds of ways, man. It's opened all kinds of doors. I joke, but I'm partly serious that I podcast for myself first.
Mm-hmm.
Because somebody's like, oh, man, you want to serve your audience. But I realized that the best way for me to serve my audience is to have the conversations that I needed to hear 2 years ago. Because in reality, I try to when you're too far in front of your audience, you're kind of, and I realize there are people who listen to my show, Making Elephants Fly in particular, that are from like 7-figure businesses.
Yeah.
To negative $7 in their bank account. Like I know that. I know that reality. Which is fun when you start talking about your avatar and who you're serving. It's like, man, I'm serving all kinds of crazy folks.
Yeah, you are.
And it's opened up all kinds of doors. There's only a handful of people that have told me no to be on the show.
Mm-hmm.
That I've asked, and working on a couple of really crazy guests right now. And obviously, as you start a show, you really want to get certain things. And then after you have a ton of conversations, you sort of want to challenge what an interesting conversation is.
Yeah.
And so, I've asked some pretty, I would even consider maybe A-list celebrities recently.
Okay.
And of kind of moving through that conversation, or maybe at least solid B-list, right? And, just trying to figure out some interesting people who are doing interesting things in the world, and really how that applies to creativity and entrepreneurship and leadership.
And the thing is, and you mentioned creativity because you are definitely a creative mind. Now, I wanted to ask you about Making Elephants Fly. Not because I have your book, but the podcast itself. Where did that come from?
Well, I started writing the book and realized, wow, I probably need a group of people that want to buy this thing. So I started the podcast as I was finishing the book.
Really?
And the podcast was first, even though the book was all but one chapter done.
Mm-hmm.
And it kind of sat for about 18 months.
Okay.
Just because I didn't have that like piece that it was done.
Mm-hmm.
And there was 2 or 3 little things that were super important that were missing. And the timing wasn't right. I had kind of put the cart before the horse.
Right.
But when you write a book, it's sort of like a backlog of other things.
Yeah. Yeah. Now tell, if you don't mind, tell the audience about Making Elephants Fly. What is the concept?
So, we've all heard the phrase, the elephant in the room. And I live in Nashville, Tennessee, and Nashville is kind of a dreamer city. People move here to do something.
Yeah.
And as I was working on another book project that I was hired to do for a group of people, a kind of a collaborative project, I was in coffee shops writing a lot, and I began to talk to the baristas. And just because I'm ADD, so I actually surprisingly thrive kind of in active situations, because the ability to go from conversation from point to point kind of just keeps my mind moving.
Yeah.
And as I was just talking to all those baristas, I realized that none of them moved to Nashville to be a barista, but that's what they were stuck doing.
Right.
And they all would tell me almost every day this big, massive dream they had. Like, I moved here to be a songwriter, or I moved here because I wanted to get, I had this healthcare app that I wanted to start. We're a big healthcare city. And so, I realized kind of the elephant in the room was all of these people with unlived dreams.
Wow.
And when I moved here in 2001, and I worked in the music business. We owned a booking agency. I was an artist manager for years. And one of the things that I realized that bands all kind of got to that point where they kind of the proverbial poop or get off the pot moment.
Yeah.
And there was always someone that wanted them off the road. A lot of times it was a spouse or a friend or a circumstance. And I always sat down with them and had the conversation. If you quit now, are you going to be able to look back in 15, 20 years and be okay with this moment?
Good question.
Are you going to be okay with the fact that you walked away at this moment? And if you are, then by all means, quit now. Save yourself a lot of time, energy, and money and heartbreak. But if you're not going to be okay, you need to see this through. And so, that whole elephant of the room kind of thing, and back to Walt Disney, is a friend of mine had posted a Walt Disney quote that's often attributed to Walt, which is, if you could dream it, you can do it. Actually, Marty Sklar wrote that for him, who was kind of one of his speechwriters and copywriters, for a ride at Epcot. And Walt had this belief that, that elephants could fly. If you look at Dumbo, and this is obviously where Making Elephants Fly comes from. Yeah. But, Dumbo flew first in the movies.
Yeah.
And then, Dumbo now flies in a theme park. And there's been another Dumbo movie since.
Yeah.
But it was always the Disney company. What makes Disney such an amazing company is very little gets done in a vacuum. It always is done through a collaborative process. And I really believe that our dreams and the big things we want to accomplish happen through collaboration.
I agree.
They happen by bringing other people together with us and building a team and a community that's smarter and wiser and has the ability to launch and make things soar. And so, at the end of every episode of Making Elephants Fly, I ask every guest what their feather is. And Dumbo flew because Timothy Mouse, who was his mentor in the movie, gave him a feather, and Dumbo believed it was a magic feather, although it was just a feather that Timothy Mouse had ripped out of the butt of a crow. But it was that belief, and so that's been one of the most interesting things that happens. It's the very last thing that happens before I say, and we'll see you next time at Making Elephants Fly.
Right.
But asking them, what is that thing? And man, I've 50 or 60 different answers, Now, granted, cool. There are some themes of like family and faith and tenacity that come through, but there's always things that you just didn't expect. And I'm actually in the process of, that's probably going to become some sort of a book.
I think that's a good idea.
Just because it's written itself.
Yeah, right.
Seth Godin, has been on my podcast, is one of the best-selling authors in the marketing space of all time. I've got his idea of what makes big ideas fly, right? And so, all these other people that have been on the show. So yeah, I think that's one of the things that I'm actually in the middle of 3 books right now.
What?
Which is the problem with ideas, man, is that
and entrepreneurs, that's what we do.
Yeah, and it's like, and I think it's like podcasting, right? It's like everybody, I've got a few like really high powered friends that are, in the process of starting their own podcast right now, and we talk almost daily, and it's just always like, man, just start it. You're gonna not be good at it when you start, but if you do it for a while and show up every day, show up and learn and adapt, and I really have tried to make my even in the phrasing of Making Elephants Fly, the podcast, is it's conversations with. Right. And so I really want it to feel like, and that's really where my idea for the show came, is because I interviewed a lot of people when writing the book. And I was like, why didn't I record these? I'm an idiot, you know? Yeah. And so I basically kind of went out and redid all of those people that I talked to.
Oh.
And they were some of my early guests on Making Elephants Fly.
That's cool.
And so, you know, it's just, and there's no, the podcasting is still very much a new art form. It's still very much.
I agree.
Like, it's still the wild, wild west. It's still, but you know, and obviously it's had kind of a rough. I mean, a lot of all of our, you know, I talk to podcasters all the time. We've also kind of seen our numbers dwindle a little bit because, you know, what makes podcasting really powerful is people take it places.
Yeah.
I talk to leaders all the time, like, I want to do a video show. I'm like, you can do a video show, but make it a podcast because, sorry for the middle picture, folks, but people take a shower with me in the podcast. People drive. People go to the gym. People do other things in the bathroom, right? Exactly. They go on a walk. They go on a road trip. They go they sit in traffic. They listen in the office rather than working. And so a lot of those things haven't been happening. Yeah. And so, you know, as those things, I could watch my Libsyn report and know when the world started to turn back on because I could see the giant spike in like, well, everyone open up the podcast app again, you know, like, and so, yeah, man, it's such a powerful format to really tell your story and really, you know, one of the things that podcasting has done for me, besides obviously just get business and know people, is it's just opened up a lot of doors. Yeah. Both for clients and customers and for influence. And I've gotten to have conversations with, I mean, reality, Seth Godin had no need to take my phone call. And honestly, he had no need to be on my podcast either. He was just on because he was super generous. And because of that, it's opened up a lot of opportunities and a lot of doors, you know, and now people call me and ask about how can I help them, you know, can I help them start a podcast? And
that's cool.
Which is always kind of an interesting conversation.
It always is
with him.
It always is.
And I, you know, and obviously as you start, you try to do it all yourself. And I'm, you know, I'm a former DIY. I'm a recovering do it all yourself guy because I could do a lot of things, man. I'm good at a lot of things. I could do design, but you know, like design's one of those things that's like, sure, I could spend 3 or 4 hours in Canva, or I could spend 3 or 4 hours coaching and helping people and doing what I do best.
There you go.
You know, I could hire somebody for $10 an hour to do the other, you know, whereas if I'm doing my most unique and most God-given skills, then I'm able to generate a lot more than $10 an hour of revenue.
I hear you.
And so, like, and a lot of that is like, you know, podcasting kind of is it's a very revealing format, you know, because it reveals who's listening. You find out who in your audience is listening.
True.
And I have a weird strategy when I release an episode. I'll release an episode and just drop it. No graphics, no nothing, because I want to reward the people that subscribe, right?
Yeah.
I want the people to get like 24 or 48 hours before I'm like telling everybody and their mom to go listen to the episode. Now, granted, if it's like a really big deal, it's a little different. But most of the time, I'll drop it before I'll even put a graphic out there. And I know that's counterintuitive, right?
Hey, it works for you.
Right. And at the end of the day, it's my show. Right?
That's it. At the end of the day, it's your show. And I try to get people to understand that it's your show. So stop trying to be like everyone else. Just create your show, create your format, your audience around it, and then make it happen. But Terry, I want to thank you for joining me today on the Productive Podcast. I definitely want to thank you for that. And I want to, first of all, I'm doing a shameless plug for you. Get Terry's book, Making Elephants Fly. So here, I love it.
And they can do that just at terryweaver.com. It's right there.
There you go.
That's like the only place you can get it, because I like to hand sign every book that goes out. And if you tell me a little bit about what you're working on, I try to like put a little note in there.
I can attest. He did. So and there's a feather. So hey guys, Terry, please let everyone know how they can listen to your podcast as well.
Yeah, they could just go to anywhere anywhere you listen to podcasts. I'm now on Pandora too, which is kind of
Nice.
It's kind of a new one, but I applied really early on and they invited me over. But I'm in pretty much every podcast player, and several that I probably don't even know exist.
And the names of your podcast again?
Just look up "Making Elephants Fly." That's the main one. If you're listening to the show, you're probably going to listen to, and I try to release the show at the beginning of every week. Some weeks I miss a week, so and that's the interesting thing about podcasting is like, oh, you got to be consistent. It's like, well, yeah, you should be, but just because you don't quit because you can't.
Right. So Terry, I want to thank you again for being a part of the Productive Podcast. I appreciate you making the time to be on here. You were great. I loved it. And let's stay more in touch and make some things happen and make more elephants fly, my man.
Let's do it.
All right. Thank you again.
You've heard the rumblings. You even thought about starting your own. But how? Everybody knows podcasting is the fastest and best way to get your message out and grow your business all at once. Although everybody knows this, nobody showed you what to do. Well, Podcast Nation is ready to do all the heavy lifting for you while you just deliver your message and grow. Join the nation and start your podcast today. Text podcast to 929-244-4323 and make them hear your voice.
Do you hear what I hear? That's the sound of your tribe, your audience, your people. That's the sound of your nation. The people who love to hear the sound of your voice as you bring your special message to them in your very own podcast. How do you get it to them? Let us handle that. We're Podcast Nation, and we make sure they hear your voice. Podcast Nation is a full-service podcasting firm that does all of the hard work for you so that you can be the talent and get your message to your people. Just text podcast to 929-244-4323 and talk to one of our staff on how you can get started with your very own done-for-you podcast. Or go to podcastnation.com and get started today. That's PODCAST nation.com. Your people are waiting on you. Make them hear your voice. Podcast Nation.
Okay, we are back with the Productive Podcaster. I told you he was great. I love Terry Weaver. Terry Weaver is one of my favorite people. And if you get a chance, make sure you check out his podcast. I'm telling you. So guess what, guys? It is time now for PodQuest.
PodQuest.
That's right, PodQuest. This is the segment of the show where you get to ask questions about one of our previous guests. And we contact them and we get your question to them and they answer. Well, the question we have this week is for our previous guest, Monique Smith, who was one of my college classmates. So I'm proud to ask her a question for you guys. And that question was, how do you find your niche? Now, if you remember, Monique's niche is Black women in sports and college sports management, who deal with the sports administration, who actually get the athletes on the field and so forth. She served in a high capacity in college sports and still does. Well, Monique's response was, make it something you love. She said she's been doing this for quite some time. Well, see, like I said, I was in school with her, and I remember we were dealing with sports in college. So she loved sports. So it was an easy transition for her to get in the sports administration part when it came to the college. She also loved the college, Hampton University. So it was easy for her to do that. So what she told me was that it was something that she loved. It was a labor of love, so it didn't seem like work to her. She then said that there are a lot of women, especially Black women, because Hampton University is a historically Black college university. So it was easy for her to go right to what she loved and talk to those women and highlight them and showcase them, to put them in a platform where they can be seen and heard, and that's on her podcast. So the Chat in the Garden is not just the name, as she put it. It's a reality for her to be able to talk to these people and give them the kind of recognition that they deserve. So for you, if you want to have a niche, find out what it is that you love and talk about those things. You'll be amazed at how many people will be interested, but you have to first get out there and just start talking about it. So I hope that answered the question on PodQuest. So now it is time for our podcast profile. Our podcast profile here on the Productive Podcast. So that's a lot of P's, isn't it? Well, our podcast profile is none other than my good friends, Brother Bedford and Dr. George C. Fraser. They have a podcast called Power All-Star Series Podcast. Power All-Star Series Podcast. I love it because Brother Bedford and Dr. George Fraser, they interview some of the top people in business, and they happen to be African-American. I was actually on the show. I had a great time. It was a fun time. They do a podcast. It's very, very informative. It's very informative because it centers around business and community. Now, keep in mind, for those of you who are watching who are not African-American, this podcast is not a cancel out one race type of podcast. It's just an educational podcast to empower those who are Black in business. That's all it is. But anyone can learn from it. Any race, creed, or color, you can learn from that podcast. It's a great podcast. Brother Bedford and Dr. George Fraser, Power All-Star Series Podcast. I definitely recommend that you guys check it out. So guess what, guys? It's time for the giveaway. That's right. It's time for the Productive Podcaster giveaway. And this week, we're going back. That's right. We're going back to another one we gave out before, because I'm getting a lot of people asking for these. This is the recording in progress door hanger, because a lot of podcasters need that privacy when you're sitting in that closet, huh? So this one goes out to Taria Hodge. Taria, thank you for watching the Productive Podcaster and listening to us as well. We thank you so much for that. And we thank you all for doing that. And if you want to be in a giveaway, all you have to do is subscribe to the Productive Podcaster and share it with your friends. Let others know that we're out there. Taria has shared it, and that's why she is getting recognized with our giveaway. So we thank you so much for that, Taria. We thank you so much for being a part of the Productive Podcaster audience. So guess what now, guys, it's time for one of my favorite parts of the show. One of my favorite parts of the Productive Podcaster is the productivity quote. The productivity quote for today. Now, I love this because I get to share something positive with you before I send you on your merry way. So the productivity quote this week comes from one of our former presidents, Theodore Roosevelt. That's right, Theodore Roosevelt. His quote says, "Whenever you are asked if you can do a job, tell them, 'Certainly I can.' Then get busy and find out how to do it." I love that one. I'm going to read it again. Whenever you are asked if you can do a job, tell them, "Certainly I can." Then get busy and find out how to do it. That's from Theodore Roosevelt. Now, I love that so much because I've been there. As entrepreneurs especially, a lot of us are put in positions where we have to learn to do things. Well, sometimes you have to learn on the fly, and I've done that. So what I do is I don't tell them, "No, I can't." As long as I know it's something that I really want to do and I want to learn, I tell them, "Yeah, I can do it." And then I'll figure out how to do it. That's what it's all about. If you're not learning in life, you're dying anyway. So you may as well just start learning how to do things. If people challenge you to do it, learn. And you'll find out when you get to do it, more people will want you to do it. I've been there. I know that because I live it. So for you, when it comes to your podcast, if you don't know what to do on your podcast or how to do a certain thing about your podcast, and someone asks you, "Can you do it?" Say, "Yeah," and then learn how to do it. It could be audio. It could be engineering. It could be mixing your sound. It could be just starting a podcast. It could be talking publicly. Those are things that scare people, but learn how to do it. And then you'll see that things will blossom for you once you do that. But don't say no. Stop limiting yourself. Tell yourself yes, tell them yes, and get to doing it. I'm sure you can make that happen. So that is your productivity quote for the day. I want to thank you again for joining me on the Productive Podcaster. Share this with everyone. I am Dr. Barrett Matthews. I look forward to seeing you on the next episode of the Productive Podcaster. Thank you for joining us on the Productive Podcaster. Be sure to join us next time for another great show. We welcome your engagement, so make sure you participate by joining the Productive Podcaster Facebook group and chime in. Also, share the Productive Podcaster with some of your friends right now. If you have a podcast and you're looking for guests, or if you would like to be a guest on a podcast, join our podcast exchange at www.podcastworlddirectory.com. We'll see you next time.